I spent $1 million to disappear to paradise for a while, but by the 6th night, I was stealing a fishing boat in the dark, convinced if sunrise found me there, I'd never live alive. But the part that still haunts me isn't even what happened to me. It's what I saw happening to someone else, something I was never supposed to witness. My name is Daniel Smith. I was 38, successful by most measures people use for that word. I'd spent 15 years building a logistics software company from nothing, which I'd faced some problems that would have broken most people. And then, about 3 years ago, I sold it, not for a life-changing amount of money, but for a genuinely obscene amount. It made my lawyer read it back to me slowly just to make sure we both heard it right. And suddenly, for the first time in my entire adult life, I had nothing I had to do. Nowhere I had to be, no deadlines, no fires to put out, no problems that needed my specific brain at 7 in the morning. I had money, I had time, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with either. So I did what I think a certain kind of person does in that situation. When the achievement is done and the emptiness moves in and you need to feel something again, I planned the most extraordinary trip I could imagine. Not a resort, not just a cruise, not any 5-star hotel in the city I'd already been to twice. I just wanted something that felt real. Something that matched the scale of what I'd just been through. Something that reminded me the world was bigger and stranger and older than anything I'd built or sold. I wanted to feel small in a good way, if that makes sense. So I hired a luxury travel consultant, the type that doesn't advertise, but you only find them through referrals, who charges a retainer just to have an initial conversation. Her name was Claire. 2 people I genuinely trusted had recommended her, and she came with a very specific reputation for what she called immersive private experiences. Not tourism, not curated sightseeing, actual immersion. The kind of travel, she said, that changes the way you see things. I told her I had roughly $1 million to spend, no fixed destination. I just wanted somewhere that made me feel uncomfortable in a way that felt meaningful. She didn't hesitate. She said, "I know exactly where to send you." I said yes before she'd even finished describing it. Looking back now, that was the first mistake. The journey took 3 days. Long-haul flight to a Pacific hub, then a smaller regional plane to an island most people haven't heard of. Then a boat. Not a charter, not a yacht, a real working fishing vessel. Salt, old diesel, and something else underneath both of those smells that I couldn't quite name. The man running it spoke just enough English to confirm my name and where I was going. That was basically it for 6 hours of open water. I sat on the deck and watched the horizon and felt genuinely at peace for the first time in months. I should have paid more attention to the way he kept looking at me, but at the time, I read it as curiosity. Just a local fisherman clocking the obvious outsider. Normal enough. But looking back now, I know exactly what that look was. It was pity. The island itself was, by any measure, one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen in my life. To be clear about that. Because what happened there didn't happen in spite of the beauty. It happened inside it. Hidden underneath it. Woven into every single part of it. 8 miles long, maybe 4 miles wide at the broadest point. Jungle so dense in the interior that the canopy blocked the midday sun almost completely. Beaches that looked untouched because they were untouched. Water so clear and so blue it looked slightly unreal, like a photo someone had over-edited, except it wasn't edited, it was just there. The family hosting me were 3 generations living in a compound of wooden structures on the northern beach. The grandfather, I never once heard him called anything other than the old man, was somewhere between 70 and 90, with this stillness about him that you only get from spending a lifetime in a place where hurrying gets you nothing. His son, Thomas, spoke excellent English and handled everything on the guest side. His wife managed the cooking and the household. And then there were 3 kids, 6 to 12 or so, who stared at me just the way kids stare at something they haven't seen before. Open, curious, completely unguarded. The first night we all ate together. Fresh fish, vegetables I couldn't name, fruit that tasted like nothing from any store I'd ever been in. Thomas asked about my life. what brought me there. I gave it the short version. The company, the sale, the sudden wide open space where my schedule used to be. He listened, and then he said something I almost didn't catch. People who come here looking for something big, sometimes the island shows them what they're actually looking for. But sometimes it shows them what they were trying to get away from. I laughed. I thought it was charming. Local color. I thought it's the kind of line that gets said to every guest. The first 3 days were genuinely perfect. No performance, no curation, just perfect. I swam in water so warm it felt like a bath, clear enough to see the bottom at depths that should have been dark. I hiked into the interior with Thomas and saw things I'm fairly sure don't have common English names. I slept better than I had in years. Deep, dreamless, heavy sleep that left me feeling like a different person every morning. I stopped checking my phone. There was barely any signal anyway, but more than that, I stopped wanting to. That habit that had run my life for 15 years just quietly dissolved, like it belonged to someone else now. On the third evening, I sat on the beach and watched the sun go down and felt something close to overwhelming gratitude. Like, this is exactly it. This is what I needed. That night, I heard something coming from the jungle that I couldn't explain. It started low, rhythmic, not quite music, but not quite not music either. Everything else had gone silent. The insects, the water, even the wind had stopped. And into that silence came this sound, just sitting there in the dark. I told myself it was an animal, something nocturnal. I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep, but then it changed. It didn't get louder. It got more structured, like it was arranging itself into something intentional, the difference between random notes and an actual phrase. Not a song, a pattern, one that felt in a way I genuinely couldn't put words to, directed, aimed at something. I lay there and listened for a long time, and then it just stopped. No fade, no wind carrying it away, just gone. I asked Thomas about it at breakfast. He smiled and said it was probably the wind moving through rock formations in the interior. Certain places on the island, he said, could create acoustics that sounded almost like music on still nights. Guests heard it sometimes. It was part of what made the island feel different, reasonable. Completely reasonable. I almost believed him. After that, the strange things were small, but that start to add up into something you can't fully ignore. On the fourth day, I was swimming in a sheltered cove about half a mile from the compound when I got this sudden, overwhelming feeling of being watched. Not vague unease, specific, directional, like the gaze was coming from somewhere. I turned toward the tree line. Nothing, just jungle and shadow, and light moving through leaves. I swam back to shore and told myself I was being paranoid. That evening, the youngest kid, the little girl, maybe 6 years old, came and sat next to me on the beach when I was reading. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she pointed toward the south end of the island and said something in a language I didn't understand. I told her I didn't know what she meant. She looked at me with this seriousness that was completely wrong for a 6-year-old's face. Careful, deliberate, and in English that sounded like she'd been taught specific phrases rather than the whole language. She said, "Don't go to the south part, not at night, not ever." Then she got up and walked back to the compound, just like that. I told Thomas at dinner. He looked briefly, almost imperceptibly, uncomfortable, then laughed it off, said his daughter had an overactive imagination. Said the south end had some unstable terrain. They kept guests away from it for safety reasons. And she'd probably turned that into a ghost story. Another reasonable explanation. I almost believed that one too. Fifth night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the sound this time. The night was completely quiet. I just lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, my mind circling things it couldn't quite land on. I'd felt this before, during the worst stretches of building the company. That specific insomnia that isn't about worry. It's about something just outside your awareness that your brain is trying to reach. I got up around 2, got dressed, stepped outside. The stars out there were something else. The Milky Way was a physical thing, an actual band of light across the sky, close enough that it felt wrong somehow. I stood there for a minute just looking up, and then I saw the light. South end of the island, ground level, In the tree line, moving, not constant, but the way a torch moves when someone's carrying it, shifting, stopping, moving again. I watched it trace a rough arc through the darkness. Pause, move again. Someone was down there. In the part of the island where I'd been told not to go. In the middle of the night, I stood there until the light disappeared. Then I went back inside, locked the door. First time I'd done that. And lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling until morning. I didn't sleep at all. I almost didn't say anything. I was halfway through breakfast, almost ready to let it go the way I'd let everything else go, when I stopped and decided I was done doing that. I told Thomas exactly what I'd seen. His face did something, just for a second, before he smoothed it back into calm. I've spent 15 years reading people across tables in difficult conversations, and I caught it. Not surprise, closer to resignation, like he'd been waiting for this. He said it was probably fishermen from a neighboring island who sometimes anchored in the sheltered southern waters and came ashore at night for navigation purposes. Something about the geography. He said it was informal, not technically allowed, but harmless. I nodded. I didn't believe a single word. Because when you've spent 15 years reading people in high-stakes situations, you also learn to recognize when someone is giving you an answer they already had ready. An answer designed not to explain something, but to make you stop asking about it. That answer had been prepared, which meant Thomas had been expecting this conversation, which meant he already knew exactly what was happening in the south part of the island at night. I spent the 6th day performing, swam, ate, had easy conversations about nothing, laughed at the right moments, asked light questions. From the outside, I looked completely relaxed. Inside, I was mapping everything. What I knew? It's a remote island, 8 miles by 4. No real outside communication. Nearest inhabited land minimum 3 hours by boat. One boat docked north of the compound, and I had no idea how to drive it. What I suspected is that something was happening in the south at night, and the family was involved, because the explanations I'd been given were too smooth, too ready. Real explanations have edges. These didn't. And the question I kept coming back to was simple. If whatever was happening down there was harmless, a fisherman, geology, a kid's imagination, why would Thomas need a prepared answer at all? Because you don't prepare answers for things that don't matter. On the 6th night, I went south. I know how that sounds. Curiosity or stupidity, but I did it. Alone in the middle of the night, in the jungle, no signal, against the only advice I'd been given. I'm not a reckless person. 15 years of careful decisions in high-pressure environments, that's not who does reckless things. But here's the truth. The alternative was spending 4 more days pretending to be fine while something was happening 30 minutes away and then going home and never knowing. And I hadn't come here for a curated experience. I'd come here because I wanted to encounter something real. I just hadn't pictured it being this. I left at 1:30 in the morning. Moved through the tree line rather than the beach. Flashlight pointed down, mostly covered with my hand. Slow. Quiet. 45 minutes to the southern end. What I found there stopped me cold. There was a building. Big. Old but maintained. Wooden, open on 3 sides, set maybe 100 feet back from the southern beach in a clearing that was completely invisible from anywhere on the northern half of the island. Someone had cleared that land deliberately. There were electrical cables running in from somewhere, and lights on inside, not bright, but visible. And there were people. 7, maybe 8. Some looked local, but at least 3 of them were clearly Western. The clothing, the posture, something less specific that I couldn't name. They were gathered around something in the center of the structure. I couldn't see what. The way they were positioned blocked it completely. I stood at the tree line and tried to figure out what I was looking at. And then one of them turned around. It was Thomas. I didn't move. I pressed back against the nearest tree and stopped breathing any more than I absolutely had to. The rational part of my brain said the distance and the darkness meant he almost certainly hadn't seen me. The other part of my brain had stopped being rational. It was running something older than reason, pure animal fear. Thomas turned back to the group. He hadn't seen me. I took one step back, then another. Then I turned and moved through that jungle as fast as I could without making noise. I got back to the room, locked the door, sat on the bed with my back against the wall, heart slamming, and I started to think. What did I actually know? A structure on the south end nobody told me about. People gathering there in the middle of the night, including Thomas, including at least 3 Westerners. Every question I'd asked about that part of the island had been deflected with a preloaded answer. What I didn't know was what any of it meant, and my brain started filling that gap with the worst things it could generate. Human trafficking, drugs, the $1 million Claire had arranged for me to spend. Who else had she sent here? Whether that mattered. The boat operator's face on the way out, that expression I'd read as pity, and whether I'd read it right or if it was something even colder. And then the thought that landed hardest. Nobody knew exactly where I was. Claire had the general region, but the specific island, the specific family, the specific arrangement, I hadn't told a single person. No coordinates, no itinerary, nothing. Because there hadn't been a formal itinerary, Claire handled all of it and I just showed up. That had seemed fine at the time, but it didn't seem fine anymore. I made it to morning without sleeping. At breakfast, Thomas was exactly the same as always. Warm, easy, attentive. Asked if I'd rested well. I said I had. He suggested a longer hike, a waterfall in the interior we hadn't seen yet. I said that sounded great. I spent the morning figuring out how to get off the island. The fishing boat was the only option. I'd looked at it enough over the past few days to know it was a diesel vessel I was broadly theoretically familiar with, not from experience, but from a phase where I'd almost bought a boat and done a lot of reading. I thought, and to be honest, that was only a thought, not a certainty, that I could probably get it moving. Fuel was the unknown. Navigation was the bigger unknown. I had offline maps on my phone. If I could get far enough out to pick up any signal at all, I might be able to reach maritime emergency services. I kept weighing it against the alternative, which was staying, acting normal, riding out the last 4 days, and leaving on schedule. Maybe I was catastrophizing. Maybe what I'd seen had an explanation I hadn't thought of. Maybe I was alone and scared, and my imagination had done the rest. I genuinely considered that, right up until I found the camera. It was in the smoke detector above my bed. I found it because I'd started asking myself a specific question. How long had they been watching me? And once I asked that, the follow-up was obvious. Are they watching me right now? I searched the room, methodically. Just the way you search for something when you're not sure what you're looking for, but you're very sure you need to find it. The lens was tiny, nearly invisible in the housing. It's something you'd never notice unless you were standing on the bed looking directly at it. I stood there and felt something give way underneath my thinking, like a floor dropping. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me making something out of nothing. This was a camera hidden in the ceiling of a room I'd been told was private. Installed carefully, on purpose. I didn't touch it, didn't disable it, because the moment they knew I'd found it, whatever came next would happen faster. I got down, arranged myself on the bed like someone resting, lay there with my eyes open. I was leaving tonight. The rest of that day was the best acting I've ever done in my life. I swam. I sat with Thomas and talked about nothing. The tides, the history of the island, his family. I complimented the dinner. I said goodnight at a normal hour. I went to my room, lay on the bed in full view of the camera, and I waited. 2 a.m. Then I moved. I'd quietly positioned what I needed during the day. Nothing that would look like packing. Nothing to trigger anyone watching the feed. Phone, passport, wallet, flashlight. Left everything else out through the west-facing window, the side away from the main compound, and into the dark toward the boat dock. The boat was there. Someone else was, too. A figure standing at the far end of the dock near the boat, not moving, just standing there in the dark. I stopped, pressed against a tree, watched. The figure stood completely still for a long time. I tried to control my breathing. I tried to figure out if this was coincidence or if I'd been anticipated. Then it turned and walked back toward the compound, and for just a second, it moved through a strip of moonlight. The grandfather, moving the way he always moved, slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I waited 5 minutes after he went inside, the 5 longest minutes of my life. Then I went to the boat. The next 4 hours are hard to describe cleanly. It wasn't one dramatic moment. It was sustained, unrelenting terror. The kind that comes from being alone on dark open water, not entirely sure what you're doing, unable to see behind you, listening to the engine, and wondering if the sound is carrying back to people who might come after you. The engine started on the 3rd try. I got it moving, headed northeast. The direction I thought we'd come from, pushed the throttle to something that felt manageable, and pointed myself at the horizon and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Fuel gauge, just over half full. 2 hours in, I got a weak signal. Not enough for a call, enough to send texts. I sent 3. 1 to Claire, 1 to a friend who knew I was somewhere in the Pacific, 1 to Maritime Emergency Services. That last one just said, "Solo vessel northeast of the island, requesting assistance. Situation urgent. Please respond." I didn't know if any of them went through. I kept going. The Coast Guard found me just after 5 in the morning, about 60 nautical miles out. Engine still running, but the fuel gauge on empty, running on fumes and whatever was left in the lines. They pulled me aboard and asked me to explain what had happened. I told them everything. The structure, the people there, about Thomas, the camera and the smoke detector, all of it, from the beginning. They listened. 1 took notes. The officer in charge asked precise practical questions, locations, physical descriptions, sequence of events. And then he said something I've turned over in my head probably thousands of times since. "You're not the first person to come from that island." I asked what that meant. He was careful. He said there had been reports, and I noticed the word he chose. Reports, not complaints, not an investigation, from the region related to activity on several remote islands in the area. Ongoing matters. He wasn't in a position to go into specifics. He said I'd done the right thing. They'd need a full statement. What he didn't say, the island was safe. The family was innocent. I'd misread something harmless. Everything was fine. He didn't say any of that. And in the silence where those words should have been, something clicked into place that I'd been circling without quite reaching. They already knew. Whatever was happening on that island, some level of authority already knew about it, and it was still happening. Which meant people had been sent there. Wealthy people, disconnected, the types who travel alone and don't file detailed itineraries. And some of those people had possibly not made it back to a Coast Guard vessel at 60 nautical miles out. Then I thought about the boat operator's face one more time and realized it was a pitying look. I was certain of it now. I gave my full statement, was taken to a regional center, and then interviewed again by 2 men in civilian clothes who didn't quite fit any specific agency I could identify. Same questions, different angle, more attention on the details. They asked about Claire, how I'd found her, who referred me, every interaction I'd had with her. They wrote down the names of the 2 people who'd recommended her. I asked if she was part of it. They didn't answer. They asked me not to contact her. 3 weeks after I got home, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Someone from a task force, regional, multi-agency, Pacific jurisdictions. They said the information I'd provided had been useful. Operations on the island had been disrupted. Several individuals identified. Legal proceedings ongoing. They said I'd been fortunate. I asked what they meant by fortunate. I asked what was actually happening on that island. I asked about the things I saw and what would have happened if I'd stayed. There was a long pause. Then, Mr. Smith, I think you already know most of those questions, and I think you're better off not having me confirm them. The call ended. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that, not moving, just sitting. Here's what I've been able to put together since then. From news coverage, from what little the task force shared. The island was part of a network, catering to people with significant money and appetites for things that can't happen anywhere with oversight or witnesses or consequences. The remote location wasn't incidental, it was the entire point. The family had been running some version of this for years, maybe longer. The legitimate hosting operation, what Claire and her clients thought they were booking, was real. And it was a front, a cover story, a reason for wealthy outsiders to show up without looking out of place. Claire? I don't know. The task force never told me what they found when they looked at her. She never returned my calls. I try not to think too hard about what that means. The two people who referred me to her, their names apparently mattered to the investigation. I haven't heard from either of them since. Because of this very event, I check smoke detectors now. Not every hotel, not obsessively, but I check them. I sleep lighter in unfamiliar places. That's just how it is now. I've taken other trips since. Boring ones. Places with good cell service and hotel loyalty programs, and nothing stranger than a slow elevator. And I'm fine with that. There's one thing I want you to take from this. Not a reason to be afraid of travel or wildness or stepping outside what's familiar. I still do all of those things, and I think you should too. Just make sure you tell someone you're going, exactly where. Send coordinates. Leave an itinerary with someone who will notice if you don't check in. Not because danger is everywhere. It mostly isn't. But danger finds the gaps. And the biggest gap you can leave is the one where nobody knows you're missing. The island was beautiful. I meant that then, and I mean it now. The most beautiful place I've ever seen, and it almost kept me. Here's what you need to know. I spent $1 million to disappear from the world for a while, but the world had been planning to make that permanent. And what saved me wasn't the money. It was never the money. It was the sleeplessness that put me outside at the right moment. It was the part of me that kept saying something is wrong here, even when every reasonable explanation said I was overthinking it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.